Good morning, everybody. We're doing a basic field lighting workshop. I'm not very basic, so it's kind of advanced, but my hope is to kind of overview and then kind of go into some deeper stuff, but kind of keep it conversational. So if you're working on a project, so much of filmmaking is subjective, right? It's in the situation, and you're in a specific situation trying to make the best of what it is. So hopefully this can be a reference that people can look to online, and they can kind of refer to if they're having some issues. So who am I? Yes. So I am a video producer, documentary filmmaker here in Wisconsin. Can we turn the lights down at all in the front bank? No? Maybe? I'm using a lot of pictures, so I want everybody to see what I'm doing. But so I do a lot of projects. I do everything from documentary shorts. I used to work for the state of Wisconsin doing legislative videos. I do a lot of work for American Family Insurance and stuff like that, so we'll kind of reference some of that stuff. I do a lot of manufacturing videos as well in Wisconsin, so I tour a lot of manufacturing facilities, so we'll kind of reference some of that stuff here in a little bit. So I think it's important to set the stage for the baseline of who you are when you're referring to this, because I think if you're going to be showing this to people in your departments and maybe people that are working for you and what their role is, I think it's important to know that as a video producer, they're in charge of their department. They're in charge of the content, right? As unsure as they might be, they're ultimately the ones that need to be in control of guiding the talent to a final product, right? So I think that's an important baseline. You're the expert. Be bold. Be intentional. If the video is a success, I should have worded this. If it's a success, your client is going to take all the credit. If it's a flop, you get all the credit for the failure. So be very intentional. A lot of filmmaking is intentional. Nothing really happens on accident. There are some happy accidents, but don't plan on those. So if you see a shadow, if you see lighting issues, if you see a crooked smile, or they're turned funny, or a hair's out of place, like, you have to own that. So you got to speak up. You got to say something. Own your video content. I'll kind of refer to this a lot because so much of this is in our control on the final product, right? I watched a lot of the videos. I've been blessed to be able to judge a lot of the videos for this convention. And there's a lot of good videos. There's a lot of people making some really bad mistakes that I think could be fixed with being intentional. So my goal is to talk about why we're gonna use lights, how we can use no lights, the importance of location selection in our pre-production, 1 and 2 or multi-person interviews. I'm gonna go over some of my favorite gear, and then we'll kind of go through some advanced techniques, and I'll just kind of show you a bunch of shots that I've been on in the last couple months, and we'll kind of walk through kind of how I did the lighting, because I think it's easier. I wanted to set up a whole big light display in here, but then I saw the other speaker was taking so long, so this is what you get. All right. Why use lights? I think it's really important that even though a lot of what we do as government public access channel stuff is PSAs, and it's a lot of informational or talking head pieces, I think it's important to really set the mood for your story, right? And I think every film, every video we produce should have a journey. It should have somebody trying to educate you on something and learning along the way, right? So with that, lighting comes into play, is how we want to tell that story, right? We have a scene from The Joker. For those of you who have watched the new one with Phoenix, I love the lighting in there because it really is showcasing the different sides of his mental health and the time period of Batman and stuff like that, and I think that's really cool. On the far right, you have more of like a film noir, single light thing, right? And maybe that doesn't play into a simple PSA that you're working on, but I think there are projects where you can really do something really fun, and you can have something at a city level or a county level that really speaks to somebody. So setting the mood. Story and mood isn't just for films. I think that's important to know. Lighting changes throughout, right? As if we're going on a journey of maybe an older woman in your town, this is a video I worked on, she was talking about the history of her going through this historic building and kind of talking and telling the story, and the mood went from this really dark, somber time to like this positive, joyous of, you know, we're investing in saving this building. So I think you can change your lighting to help kind of match that mood. So again, this is a little bit more advanced, but it's important. Creating depth and shape. I think a lot of the videos that I was able to judge, there was a very flat person standing, and it didn't feel like I was part of that video, whether it was a documentary short or whether it was just a PSA, whatever it was, giving that person depth is really important, and we can do that with lighting. This is a really good thing. If you're going to write anything down, the eye is drawn to the brightest thing on your frame. Lighting is going to tell your viewers where to look. So here, that is a monitor, and we're looking at false color in that monitor. So you can tell that I'll go into this later too, but we want our subject to be the first thing that our eye is drawn to, just like when you're doing design. What's up?
Will you be talking about false color at all?
I'm going to talk a little bit about false color. I don't want to get too deep into it, but we can always have a conversation after. But I do have a slide where we'll talk a little bit about false color. All right, no lights, no problem. I think this is important because I think a lot of people that I've talked to say, well, I don't have a filmmaking budget, or I don't have a client that's willing to pay, or I'm in a small city and I can't do anything. I think there's a lot of alternates to that, and I think being creative as a filmmaker is part of our job from a story perspective, but I also think it's part of our job from a production perspective too. So the sun is cheap, the sun is free. Set your person near a window in a building. If you're outside, there's a lot of options when it comes to bounces and to flags, and they're cheap. When we go through gear, I'll talk a little bit about kind of some of the price breakdown of that. So I have a reference here. So this is my daughter. You can tell how thrilled she was to be a part of my, my project here. But on the left was just sunlight. That was no shade. And on the right, I have a shade over her face. So this is it was just a scrim, it was just a bounce, it was a diffusion mat that was just over the sun, but it creates shape, right? Like this. I saw a lot of this when I was looking at the videos. I saw a lot of this. Hard shadows, people wearing sunglasses. We're filmmakers, and I think we can do a little bit better than that. So a cheap C-stand, cheap diffusion, I think can kind of get you to make something really cool. Questions on that? Anybody ever use bounces and stuff like that outside? Cheap, we'll go through that. So if you're referring back to this in the future, skip forward to the gear part where I kind of go through some of the options for that, because yeah, it's spring, so my yard's a little messy, don't worry about that. So direct sunlight is harsh, and I think the goal is to avoid that, right? If we're shooting overcast, sometimes it's not the most pretty because you don't have the clouds. If we can find a spot where there's shade, I mean, even this scenario here, they could have jumped over into the aisles if they didn't have the flags. But even the flag diffusion from behind still gives you that backlighting, which is important. We'll get to three-point lighting in a little bit. Questions so far? Good. I had a lot to go through still. Location, I think picking your location is the most underappreciated part of the filmmaking process. I think so many people have their city council member come to them and say, you need to do a video at the library, and you go to the library and you just set up your camera and you get it done because you don't have time to do it what I would consider the right way. So I think that pre-production process of location scouting, of looking at the backgrounds. So for example, I don't want to jump too far ahead of myself. What's in the background and what do you want in the background? That's something you're going to consider when you're location scouting. So these are 3 different shoots that I went on here in the last couple months. Had I not gone and scouted this first one, I would have missed a huge opportunity. This is Trevor. This is Caravan Trailers in Fox Lake, Wisconsin. They're one of the largest manufacturers of trailers. They work with big boat manufacturers and make a lot of trailers for snowmobiles and stuff like that too. So I would have missed this huge opportunity to kind of get their sponsor in the back here had I not gone there ahead of time and seen that this sign was on there, but it was not lit. So I had to bring in all the lighting to kind of fill that. So that way that could be a prominent piece, and that shot I think turned out really great. Brittany here in the middle is a welder, and this was at a different factory. And they actually had some really nice natural lighting. So I didn't have to bring a bunch. We were able to do a bunch of different interviews, and I think we gained about an hour of shoot time on this shoot because we didn't have to go and set up lights and kind of control this shot. And then on the far one, I should have used a light. Originally, We had planned that the robot was going to be actually welding, but when he ran the program, it was only a minute long. So it welded in a minute. We stopped and we ended up having to we had it run the program, but it just wasn't welding, so we could kind of have it keep going. So that was one where I didn't plan on bringing lights. That I really, looking back, it probably would have helped make him separate a little bit. How much control do you have of lighting? So are there lights? You know, in these factories, oftentimes you can't. If you're in a library, maybe you can in a specific section. So you're going to set up, maybe you have a bunch of lights, maybe you don't. I think using on-location light is okay, but then we lose control, right? And filmmaking is all about control, telling your story. So you want to have that control. So I like the idea of picking a spot where you have that control. Location scout when possible. So even if somebody tells you and you're going to go shoot in an hour, like, you guys should all be a part. Who here is a part of a city? Everybody in city. So you all have keys to the kingdom, right? So go to these places ahead of time. Take a look around. Visualize in your head where you see somebody standing. And I know maybe it's just a talking head, but in order for this industry to keep pushing forward, in order for PEG to stay alive, we need to keep elevating. And I think my goal is to constantly be getting better and take the time. What time of day is it? Where's the sun going to be at? This is an app I use. It's called Sun Surveyor. I think they have a paid version, but I think there's a free version as well. Super duper awesome. I can actually set the time on the bottom there, and it'll show me where the sun is with that ball. So I can stand next to a window, it moves with me, and it shows me where the sun's going to be. So if I know that I'm filming at 7 o'clock in the morning, I know that the sun is going to be below the horizon. I'm going to have strong shadows through the trees as it's coming through, whatever the case. So that's really handy when you're scouting, just to kind of get an idea. I also take a lot of pictures when I'm scouting, because I think it's important for me to look back when I'm planning.
I try to scout the same time of day that I'm going to do the shoot.
Yeah.
So if it's going to be 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'll go to that place at 4 o'clock in the afternoon a day or two beforehand so I can...
Yeah, so the comment was that he goes ahead of time to look at his locations, which I think is important at the same time of day, as long as you're considering cloudiness and sun like that, because that could change things too. But yeah, scouting is important. Time of day is also important. Busyness, you know, are you going to notice traffic? Is there a train that comes by at 1 o'clock every day that you don't realize? So that's another good reason to do that. Single person interviews, I think, is the next big thing. I think we all deal with talking heads, sometimes too much, and it takes away from the creative side a little bit, but there's a lot of ways to light when you're doing single person interviews. Your traditional 1, 2, 3, I actually heard somebody say that they use a 4-point lighting, which, I mean, you can look into that, but 1-point lighting is kind of your kind of selfie mode the YouTubers are using. They have a ring light or something. Newscasters have a light on top of their camera that's kind of just pointing at him. This lady here, you can see she's got like a spotlight. I don't think it's the most flattering, but it's something, right? So 1-point lighting is something. 2-point lighting is going to kind of be this down here. So that's going to be your key light, your fill light. Maybe you're in a rush. Maybe you have a natural backlight that you're already using, so you don't need to bring that light. Maybe you're reading off a teleprompter and you just want to have a simple lighting setup. 2-point lighting. So that's one light on each side. And that doesn't have to be a light. That doesn't have to be an LED panel. It can be a natural light. It can be the sun. We'll go through an example here in a little bit of some examples of key lights that I used from natural light as well as fill lights. So we'll go into 3-point lighting because that's going to be the standard next here. So in 3-point lighting, key, fill, backlight, right? Your key light is going to be your strong light. Your fill light is the goal is to kill the shadows to create that shape. You're not trying to flood them with light from the front. You're trying to give them a softness about them. So often the key light is pretty hot. I'll go through some examples here of situations where I had to really increase the key light because I was trying to eliminate the background because it was so bright in there. So your key light is going to help that. Your fill light's going to kill the shadows. Oftentimes natural light coming in an overcast day is pretty good. This would be too hard light coming in here. And then backlight. Backlight is crazy important to help give your person shape. I'll show you some samples again in a little bit of how the shoulders and the hair and how that kind of sets them apart from the background, and it's that little thing, right? Anybody can put up a camera and film somebody talking. It's the little things that are going to make our video better than the next guy's video or girl's video. And backlighting, I think, really helps separate a subject. Now, if we're going into the advanced side of this, we'll go and look at a couple of films here where they used a high key light and a low key light. And these are kind of extreme examples. We have The Godfather, where they had a light literally above him to create this very ominous shadow. Generally, we're using key lights when it's a very white background, so it's that infinite background space, a bright. But in this case, they use it to kind of create this kind of eeriness and this gloom. Again, these aren't going to be for all your projects, but there's going to be projects you run across that you want to have control, and sometimes a super high light or a super low light is going to kind of help shape that. Warmer and cooler lights, I think, is important too. So if you have a different theme, so the Joker, back to the Joker, for example, there are shots where he's with his mother and he's remembering these times of these happy times, and it's very light and warm and saturated, and that was done with lighting, right? That wasn't always just done with color grade, but lighting was really important in that. There are other times in that same film, the Joker, that he's just falling apart mentally, and they're using the teal or the blue and stuff like that. So kind of keep that in mind when you're looking. Sometimes it's important to have a balance and a very natural look, and sometimes you want to do something fun and creative.
How do you deal with mixed color temperatures?
Yeah, my goal is to always match the temperature that's the harshest, right? So if I'm in a room like this where it's really warm, I will generally match that if I don't have control. Ideally, you have control of the lighting, right? We can kill all the lights in here, turn them off, bring in my own 3-point lighting, 4-point, 10-point light, however many lights I want, and control it. So I think control is going to be your best friend in that situation. We'll talk a little bit about diffusion flags and kind of the use of that. So like, let's say we couldn't turn the lights off in here. I could put up a C-stand and put a flag or tape a garbage bag over these lights to kill the warmness or the coolness. Sometimes you can't because they're way up above. And in those cases, I'll try to match that, and then I use color cards for like white balance and color matching and stuff like that. Does anybody ever use color cards? Yeah. So those can be kind of friendly. Story should really drive all your decisions. So look at your story, right? If you're trying to do a reenactment of an event, that's going to help drive your lighting decisions, because as advanced as editing is, you probably don't have a lot of time to hire a special effects guy to change all the lighting in your situation. So be very intentional with your story. Know what your story is, and try to find something along that journey that you can match to the lighting. Here was a setup I actually just did recently. This is kind of back to 3-point lighting again. So this was a nursing home, and I was talking to the founder of this company, and he was in this giant wheelchair, and I didn't quite adjust for that, but I was close. So you can see this is my backlight, and then my key light there, and then I was able to use the windows because there was another set of windows along this wall, and that was my fill, and it kind of created this really natural feel. So hopefully you can kind of tell what that looks like on the dark screen. So here you see my I drew this with my mouse, so it's kind of funny. So you can see the key light, right? The big thing that I was trying to work with in this was he actually just had some skin cancer removed off the right side of his face. So we had to have the angle strong enough where you couldn't see the bandage and you couldn't see, I mean, his face he was really self-conscious about it, so he had asked. So we had the key light a little stronger. Again, that was to help separate him from the background too. We'll go into this in the advanced section where I talk about lighting the background. But you can see the fill from the window was kind of giving this nice shape to his face, right? On this side. The key light I made stronger so that way the background was a little darker to get him separated. Again, talking about false color and your eye being drawn to the brightest thing in the room. I wanted him over another like 6 inches to kind of cover that wall corner, but his electric wheelchair was so big and cumbersome that we couldn't actually get him to position, and I couldn't move the stand over without losing something. And then again, the shoulder light, that backlight, that's so strong that it's kind of making him separate from the background a little bit. So, questions on that? Single person, 3-point lighting, you got it all figured out? Not always ideal, but when you're in a controlled environment, it's nice to have all the pieces that you need. Does everybody use lights? Do you guys have light kits, 3-point light kits, something like that? Yeah, for the most part? Good.
Lighting still, it's kind of soft.
It's soft.
So,
Yeah.
did you soften it with
Impulse.
sort of cover over the light or
So,
your key lights there?
yeah, so it was a little soft. So the trick I did was my light is almost literally right outside of of the camera frame here, so right outside of his face. That's another thing to note. The closer your light is to your subject, the softer the light is, right? When we look at the sun and we stick our hand out, you have hard lines. My daughter's face at the beginning, right? That's because the sun is so far away. If the sun was right up to her, it would just peel away. Question?
Are the lights in the background on the shelf?
Yeah. So we'll go through that a little bit, but yes. So I did light the background separately because it was so dark. So we'll get into that. And
Using neutral density filter at all?
yes. So I use a Sony FX6 and an FX3 sometimes, but generally 2 FX6s when I'm shooting. So that has a built-in ND filter. How many of you are using cinema cameras? Okay, yeah. How many of you, so you still need an ND filter for the 3. How many of you are using like a DSLR camera or something like that? Nobody? Camcorders? Kind of general camcorders when you're filming for the most part? Cool. Those often have ND filters built in too, don't they? Sometimes. So multi-person interviews. I think the big difference is you want to light everybody separately. I think people think that you have 2 people in the same spot that you can just crank the temperature on your light, maybe move it back a little bit. Again, going to the concept that the further your light is away, the stronger the shadows are going to be, and the harder the light's going to be, and you're going to have this weird shadow causing effects all over these people. So generally, I'll set up each person. I'll set up a chair. I'll light that person, and then I'll set up another chair. Generally, I don't do a fill light because when you have 2 key lights, 2 people so close together, it kind of fills the room with light and it creates this key light. Again, if you're using a giant window or natural light, that's your friend to kind of help diffuse things. This is an example of one of my documentary shorts. We did 2 versions. We did one as a documentary and then one as kind of a PSA about hands-only CPR through the fire department. So this was our call to action at the end of that. We actually had the guys doing some CPR in the background. And this is kind of just a clip of what that looked like. I wish I would have gone a little higher to get rid of the ceiling lights, but they were very short people. Questions? Everybody do a lot of multi-person interviews, or is it generally single people? Multi? Mix? Both? Yeah. Cool. Questions on single or multi-person shooting? We'll go into some gear stuff here, and then we'll come back to some more advanced stuff. But that's kind of my general stuff for single and multi-person lighting. Questions? Gear. This is always fun because it's incredibly subjective. But I do think that there are some gear pieces that are essential. I think there are some gear pieces that you can get away with not having. And then I think there are some gear pieces that are just fun to play with and to create kind of different fun scenes. So this is kind of what we'll go through in this section here is light panels, flexible light panels, flags, bounces, C-stands, tube lights, and pucks, which in my, here you can see I use actually a tube light as my key light up above Jim and Cameron there. Light panels. If you've got an unlimited budget, I'm buying Aputure all day long because they're strong, they're quality, they're bright. If you have the budget for ARRI style lights, then you're probably not working for a city because those are, $5 to $10 grand just for the single light. So. if you don't want to get the aperture lighting, and you don't want to get a softbox, or you don't want to get these different kind of domes, there's a lot of LED panels like the ones that I was using that are really good in the $200 to $800 range, or $200 to $600 range. If you're looking for high power stuff, you're going to end up spending more. Lighting, I think, is you get what you pay for. So if you're trying to save some money and get some cheap stuff, you're going to get some cheap stuff. And if you're okay with that, make the best of it. I think that's great. But if you have budget, I would always invest a little bit more into lighting, because you're going to definitely get what you pay for. So the flexible light panels and the roll-up panels, these are really cool. So Falcon Eye, I think it's Falcon Eyes actually, but they actually make these LED panels that are similar to the $200 to $800 light panels, but they're flexible, right? They're little lights on a piece of fabric, so they're really nice if you want to tape up. If you have, maybe you have somebody sitting here and you have a small space and you don't have a bunch of sandbags or something, and you want a nice light something, or a backlight that is going to go right over somebody, but you don't have the right support system for it. The light panels can be super handy. Tape to ceilings, no fear of falling, less rigging. You don't need a C-stand. So if you're really budget conscious, this is probably the route I would go. They're not crazy bright, but when you have control, they're really nice. So if we were to able to kill the lights in here, we could use that and create a really cool scene, a really cool interview, and have a really fun mood with that. Stands you can get for, 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks, and it's really nice if you're flying, if you're traveling, and you don't have a big car for whatever reason, and space is an issue. Questions on the flexible? Anybody use the flex?
You can make those rigid if you want them to be.
Yeah, so it has a frame, just like, and the dome too. So yeah, it kind of looks like I'm not sure how to describe that, but it's just a square. It's just posts, and then it just clips to it, and then it's incredibly rigid. So those are really nice. Flags and bounces, I think, is my best friend. My truck is always full of C-stands, bounces, and flags. So I actually have black flags and a couple of diffusion ones. So the first one up there is diffusion. The second one is more of just kind of a bounce flag, but you can use it as diffusion if you get crazy strong sun. Same thing with the bounces. I'm assuming everybody has some of these. These are cheap, right? Everybody's got a bounce kit, flag kit. Use them.
When do you use the gold?
So sunset, if you're trying to get or sunrise, if you're on the beautiful beaches of Wisconsin anywhere and you have somebody sitting there and you're trying to get some warmth, the gold is incredibly strong. But I think done in the right way, I've seen a lot of people use it and it's kind of been cool. So you don't need to bring a high-powered, $5,000 light on the beach. You can just use the gold and kind of get the warmth that you're looking for. So I've used it for backgrounds too. So if I have a foreground of my character, I have a foreground element, and then I have my landscape, right? I can try to shine on that middle ground with that to kind of create some color or something like that. So I use these more than anything in my entire kit. And oh yeah, bring some clips and some sandbags, because they fall over, and as soon as you put a flag on a stand, you probably all know how it turns into a parachute. So even just with my daughter, I was like, I could just do this quick, and it blew the stand out of my hand. So, but I use this probably more than any other piece because it helps me control the lighting. It's all about control. C-stands, I think these are my best friends. I have a ton of C-stands. They're not the cheapest investment when you're talking about inexpensive stuff, but it's definitely the most versatile. I use one for my shotgun mic. I use a C-stand for monitors, for director's monitors when I have a bigger set, or if I have a client that wants to be on set, or even if I have a producer sitting with me asking the questions, they can kind of use it as a reference to kind of give them some confidence. Sometimes the financier will come and they want to see what's going on, and they don't like my log format on my camera because there's no color, so I give them a monitor with some LUT or something applied that they can see what it looks like. The brand is kind of irrelevant. I've seen a lot of different stands. It kind of comes to preference. I like Matthews, but I have a lot of different ones too that have been kind of passed down. Make sure you get one with a detachable base. I think that helps you be proper with how your C-stand functions. As far as if you have that arm on the wrong way, it could potentially fall and hit your talent, right? So you have to make sure you kind of do that. There's actually a video on YouTube. It's like 10 minutes long, and it's all about C-stands, and it's stuff that you never thought that you needed to know, but Like there's a rhyme and reason to how everything does and how the knobs twist and how it tightens itself. And so yeah, 150 to 200 bucks is kind of what I've seen for them. I always get black ones. I have a couple of silver ones, and they create glare, and I don't like glare. So I've gone to black. They get scuffed up, but it kind of looks cool. People think that you do a lot of stuff when you have a scuffed up black stand. So bounces and flags. So the bounces to use diffusion, the bounces to one man show it, right? If you're on your own, which a lot of us are when we're out doing stuff for the city, having a stand there to be in place of a person, super, super handy. Flags too. So if you have the big square, you can get even bigger ones if you're doing a couple people. I do work at the AmFam Champ every year, the golf tournament, and we always have a giant structure that's maybe 20 feet wide, 10 feet long, something like that, to have multiple people under so they're not in that strong sunlight. Cool. C-stands. Everybody's got C-stands, right? Good. Use them. Tube lights. These are my next favorite light of all time because I've used this more than I think anything outside. I use this as much as my C-stands, so they're always with me. They're not the cheapest. You can find some of the tubes individually for maybe $300. You can get the smaller tubes, which are fun to put in like the backgrounds of scenes to kind of create colors. This 4-foot kit, for example, from like B&H is right around $1,000 for 2 tube lights, and I've used them as key lights, fill lights. They have some cool special effects when I'm doing more music videos, and I'll show you kind of what we did on a music video I worked on here in a little bit. Yeah, compact, RGB, super cool. Tube lights. Anybody have tube lights? Nobody has tube lights. Get some tube lights. Put those on the budget. They're worth it. I'll show you why. The puck lights, so the Aputure MCs, my favorite. I use them almost as much as the tube lights. And this is to help create that scene. This is the really advanced side of lighting of not just having a subject sitting in front of a wall. You know, I see so many people take these interviews and they're just right up against the wall, right? There's no separation, there's no depth, and they just blend in. And I think it's lazy, because if you're intentional, you can create a scene real easy. Even in here, right? You could create something in the background with uplighting or anything to kind of give it something more than just a blank wall. So these are really nice, magnetic, so you can stick them on stuff. When I'm at the manufacturing shops, man, these are a godsend, because I can put it on any piece of metal. You need any forklift to kind of amplify the forks or anything like that. So these are really, really awesome. I've seen guys tape pieces of metal to places and stick their magnets on too. So if you don't have something that's metal, it's still nice to not tape, right? You don't want to tape right over it. These are really great for on shoes. So if you're doing that one-point lighting, so let's say you're going to a bake sale, and you're going to just take shots of the different foods that are on the table, and it's just like happens to be in this dark room. You can throw this right on a shoe, kind of film, and kind of have your little spotlight or a self light, something like that. I have the one with the metal case like that, so that way I can just plug them all in at once. Otherwise, you got to charge each one individually. About $100 a piece, about $500 for the kit. It's pretty handy. It does the same thing as the tube lights. You can create different effects and kind of have strobe lights, right? Everybody likes the cop lights. Those are fun. Recreating different scenes like that is pretty cool too. RGB is a lot of fun. I like to match logos. So I was just at MEC recently in Mayville at one of their facilities, and they are red and white. So I kind of had some red and white ones sprinkled around in the background. This is my favorite conversation. Not necessarily related to lighting, but it is, right? Because the faster our lenses are, the lower the light we can shoot in. The better our cameras are, the 4K cameras, the cinema cameras, are going to allow more light in through the camera, so you don't have to light as much. We still have to be intentional, right? We have to think of story first. How can we shape that light to tell our story? But then also, how can we use the camera's effects to use built-in ND filters to make everything drop down a step, so that way we can amplify our subject or whatever. So I like the Sony line. I like the color science behind Sony's cameras. I've used the Sony Venice a couple times, and it has a beautiful color spectrum. The FX9s are really nice. I rent those a lot. I own an FX6. The FX3s are really nice. I use that. That complements the FX6 and 9 really well. The budget one is the FX30. It's the newest one that came out. Those are DSLR style cameras. Same with the Canon Mirrorless R5, really nice camera. Super low light for that one, I think. These are all, I believe these are all full frame cameras. Maybe the red kimono's not, but so that's kind of it, right? Pick your camera, but don't be locked to it. I think I'd rather invest in better lighting, rather invest in more gear for that side of things than a nicer camera. I think you can get away with doing a lot with pretty cheap cameras. I would suggest renting these too. I think if you can get some buy-in from the city or the community to do certain bigger projects, more creative projects, rent a camera. You can rent an FX9 for like $200 for like a week. So super cheap, especially if you have a really creative project that you want to do, or you want to win a trophy or an award and invest some time into that. I got a couple slides here about some advanced techniques that kind of go along with what I've been saying. Is find the theme to your story, right? Instead of just taking, we'll go back to the baseline introduction slide I had where you're in control of the video, right? As much as you have people influencing you, you need to take ownership of it. So find a theme in that story. Find a way to take somebody on a journey in the story that you're creating, right? That's what filmmaking is about, is not manipulating, but creating emotions so people can be engaged. And I think that's what's going to make us better as PEG stations, is to have better content, to be more intentional with a creative theme. Find some lighting that matches the mood, right? We talked about the Joker, Godfather, Frankenstein. Find something that amplifies and maybe pushes it and drives that emotion a little harder. Make somebody cry because the mood just feels right. When you can make somebody cry, that's the best feeling. Not in a mean way, but it's like it's the best, right? Because you built that moment. And oftentimes I'll watch my films and I'll be really excited, and it can be an emotional experience. Develop a scene in your background that's lit separately. I just did another factory tour, and I had them bring in a couple big, I said, can you bring in some giant forklifts and some big equipment in the background? And they were like, yeah, sure. So asking doesn't hurt, but build a scene in your background. Find something that is on site that you can move. Again, if you're scouting and you see that there is construction site happening, you know they're not going to be working, see if you can talk to the city administrator to get them to move a tractor in a certain spot in front of the library. Whatever it is. So develop a scene in your background, because I think that helps tell the story, but it also brings up that creativity a little bit, just to make it stand up that much more, right? We do these little things in every element, and we have award-winning films. We have more views on our videos. We have more people excited to share, and we get more money for our PEG stations to kind of stay around. So we have to keep evolving, and I think these are just some little things to do that. RGB color lights is another one. Uplighting on walls, we'll go through some examples. I keep saying that. I feel like they're coming. False color. So we'll talk about this a little bit. Feel free to ask any questions. For those of you who have external monitors or higher-end cinema cameras, you're going to have a false color mode in there. This is a Ninja Atomos 5, I believe. The goal is to, in my mind, is to create the focus where you want it, right? And maybe that is the background. Maybe you want people to look at the tractor in the background, and as the subject stands into view, they become the brightest thing. But the eye is going to go to whatever's brightest. So your eye goes to the red and the yellow of this flower in this example before it goes to the background. Make sure your subject, where you want people to look, right? Back to intentional. It doesn't have to be the subject. You could have it be on something happening in the background. I just did a shoot where I had somebody actually working in the background, and I had a single light on them as they were basically doing what this person was talking about they do on a regular basis. So it was a recreation of a scene in a scene. And that's something I wanted people to watch. And I didn't care if they were looking at my subject who was telling the story, because there was a story happening for them. So I like false color in the monitors, because that, one, you can do it while you're setting up lighting. So you can see where your hot spots are. You can see that he's got a shiny piece on his forehead that you need to maybe use a damp cloth to, whatever, makeup. Maybe you have a reflection. Maybe you have a light in the background that you're trying to set up a scene and it's too bright and you need to drop everything a couple stops. Speaking of background, so this was the background of that scene. I have a close-up here on the next one. I think these are all my pictures now, so we'll just kind of talk about real-life examples. I use gold mounts on my lights because I don't like dragging cords around. Sometimes it's nice to be able to plug in if I know I'm going to do a shoot in a place for a long time. I like to be intentional, and I never do 2 interviews in the same spot for the same video. Even if in this scene I would turn and use this other bookshelf or this couch, and I would use that as a background before I use the same shot twice. Again, I think being intentional with it, you can't just kind of regurgitate. Like, take a little pride in your work and set up a new scene, even if it takes another 15, 20 minutes. It's worth it in the end to have it. So don't duplicate. Don't be lazy. Here was the background. So that's a tube light. So that's one of my Nanlite tubes, and I just kind of had it at, I think it was almost 100%. I had some weird, strong shadows that this tree, it was casting on this tree. Unfortunately, I couldn't quite get them over, so you don't really even see it in the end. But then I have the Aputure MCs. They're all just magnetically on there, and I just had my 4 kit. I have a 12 kit as well, which I didn't bring because I didn't think I was going to need. But it might have been too bright. We'll look at the final thing here. So had I had every shelf lit, it might have gotten really bright. I actually started with a color, but it didn't make any sense to me, and it felt like I was just trying to do it to do it. As far as the books goes, that wasn't very intentional because it was just whatever. But here I'm using like a vintage Zeiss lens, and I wanted him to kind of be this nice soft character, and I wanted people to really engage with what he was saying, so I didn't want the background to be too distracting. You can kind of see a little bit of the lights. I probably could have flipped those because you can see the LED panel on them there, but that wouldn't be too hard to kill. So light your background separately. Take some time. This probably took me half an hour to kind of play around with it, right? Like, it was a lot of moving plants around. I really wanted to move that lamp out of the shot, but I thought, well, if he's there, maybe it would balance it a little bit. I'm still not sure how I feel about it, but that's what it was. Questions on this lighting setup? Anything that anybody wants to know specifically about how I lit this background? Pretty self-explanatory, right? Have some extra lights, make it worthwhile. I mean, this shot would have been so different had I not lit that background. So hopefully you can see that it did help bring some balance, and it made it feel intentional, like this is a big deal. Sometimes too, when you have your clients on set or the city members or council members or whoever, they see you put this extra effort in, they just realize how much more work it is to do something the right way.
How do you deal with glasses?
Glasses, I think I actually have a slide on that, a picture of that. I jack that light up, always. I think, again, the baseline, we're video producers, so our job is to make sure they know that they're gonna have glare if they're looking up and around. So make sure you let them know ahead of time, like, hey, if you have to wear your glasses, which sometimes they do, I try to get them to take them off. I never let anybody wear sunglasses, but make sure they're looking eye level. Can you do a lot? Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you want to move the light that it's reflecting, right? Maybe you shut a blind or something like that. Before I show you the final of this factory shoot, I wanted to kind of show you my setup and kind of show you some of the issues that I was dealing with in this. This was part of that story with the last gentleman. His name was Jack. He was the founder of this shop, and this next person was telling this really intimate story about him working with him on the factory floor and how he was reacting and stuff like that. So I wanted to have a setting where we were focused on the subject, but I only had this warehouse to shoot in, and as you can tell, it's like this massive warehouse with stuff moving and stuff happening, so I didn't have a lot of options. I didn't have control of the lighting, so I couldn't control it. So when you have crazy bright LED lights from a factory like this, the only thing you can do is go up, right? So you gotta really crank it. And that's where you have to get into a little bit more expensive lightings. And then the second thing was I didn't want it to be really bright. I wanted it to kind of have this muted, kind of dark feel, so we could focus on our subject without having to do a lot of crazy editing, without being able to control the house lights. So this was the final shot here. So the background, super dark. I can still make it darker if I wanted to, but Eric here really stands out, and his gestures were really beautiful, the way he would talk, because the light would hit his hand in a way that just kind of, I mean, you were drawn into what he was saying, and the story wasn't super intense, but my hope was that the lighting would kind of help showcase that. So, right, we go back to that backlight. Sometimes the tube lights aren't strong enough. Sometimes your LED panels aren't strong enough. So having a nice strong, you got to find the balance, right? That's another thing you got to be intentional about. Some people like really soft I like really strong to help separate them from the background and kind of feel like we're somewhere else. So I think that kind of lighting it looks really sharp, and for this style, it worked because with Jack. So that was there. Questions on this setup? Anybody ever done anything like that where they just crank the exposure on their key lights to drop the background? It's a fun trick when your light is brighter than the lights in the room. So in order for us to really lose some light in here, we'd have to go brighter than the lights in the room. So it can be tricky at times. Yeah.
How far back would you backlight for this? I know you had to crank it all the way up. But
Yeah.
How far back was that?
So it actually was almost over his shoulders.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was pretty close. I was far enough where I could get his hands and his movements. So if his hand was out, it would still kind of have that light on his finger. I should have came up a little bit. He did actually end up talking with his right hand, so I was kind of. That goes back to the offset backlight too. That's something you got to play with. Does it make more sense to bring that light on this side? Does it make more sense to keep it opposite my key light? My key light is on the left here, and then I had a soft fill light, and then keeping that. I don't know if I even had a key light in this one actually, or a fill light. No, I didn't use a fill light in that. So we have that, kind of dramatic shadow on the face. Again, it was kind of this dark story. So like having him be in the dark was a choice that I had made. So this was a documentary. It was called Widowmaker, about this gentleman here. His name is Jim. Jim had a heart attack. We actually did a recreation in the Super Lube that he was in. If we have time, maybe I'll play that. It's only a 5-minute documentary short, but the kind of big reveal at the end of this whole thing, we do the recreation, we have him look like he dies, we have the actual phone call from dispatch. I was able to work with the county, and we did some fun stuff there. I had the fire department actually came out on site, and we recreated the whole scene with Jim as himself. But we don't know until almost the end of the film that he lives through this. So I was building suspense, right? It's a simple story, but how you tell it can change everything. So I wanted the light in I wanted to film him in the ambulance because that was kind of the centerpiece of this. And I wanted it to kind of feel like this rebirth, and I chose blue for the lights inside, and I think it ended up turning out really kind of cool. So we see him for the first time saying, I woke up 2 days later alive, and this is kind of the shot. So if we were to rewind a little bit, JD, who was one of the guys on scene, he was telling the story, and I probably could have brought the red a little bit down, but I wanted the mood to be very chaotic, but I also wanted it to feel like you didn't know what was going to happen. So I went with a red for this. So I kind of just had a light in there. This was a really complicated shot because I was filming in the ambulance, and
You're dealing with hats on both of them.
hats on both of them. They both were hat guys because they're both bald, so they wanted to wear hats.
Do a little uplighting?
I actually had a little bit. So we actually covered the station window. So behind me there, this whole wall is just bright light. You can see it down further down. So we did have a little channel that was kind of going up on his chin. But I felt like with the dramatic side of things, I was like, I'm okay with a little bit of shadow to kind of hide. I mean, he really sensitive guy. He's crying through the whole thing. So like he's looking around. So his portion of it wasn't as much as the recreation. I spent a lot of time with the recreation and not a lot of time with the interviews. And that's an intentional thing in your editing too. Like I watched a guy, he did a video where he never showed the person on camera. He just showed stuff that they were talking about. And it turned out really good. So this was Jim. When we find out he's alive, this is part of the story where JD's talking about just the chaos of the situation and the fact that it was. So this is kind of just a blown up of that other one. This was the same thing where I created some motion in the background to kind of, we're running out of time. So they're doing CPR. This is the big call to action at the end where the fire department actually reached out to me with this story, and I just took it to the next level. This was, I'll try to go through these last 5 slides pretty quick. This was a music video I shot with an independent company. It was actually a pretty big budget. There's tube lights that we lined the inside. So this is a dream sequence on the right here. So we start in the cafe, and we had it really natural lit. We shot that during the day. We filmed this all night long because there's this big long dream sequence where 90% of the music video took place. And then we started using those tube lights up above to kind of really create this kind of dramatic effect. This is in Baraboo. Anybody near Baraboo area? Yeah, Brookfield. So this is a Broadway diner. We actually ended up with our musician on top. I got a really cool drone shot of him in front of that sign, standing on the building. But we had rented some crazy big lights you can kind of see the light coming through there. It kind of helped fill the room a little bit, made it feel a little bit more natural. This was a shoot I did at the Capitol across the street here, and this was one of their Supreme Court, or their courtrooms in the four corners there. So on the right, you can tell like the lighting is awful, and it's this yellow, and it reflects off everything. So it was a room where I had this conflict, right? I don't want to put this orange light on them because I'm not going to be able to color correct when it's that strong. So I'd gone back and forth. Do I turn all the lights off? Do I keep the lights on? I did one test with one of our elected officials, and I instantly turned the lights off and went with the dark scene. It was definitely more moody, but when he was standing there reading off, I have a teleprompter on the camera, it ended up looking really good because you were really focused on him and you had this cool lighting around him that ended up being really, really great. So that's a decision you got to make. Do you keep the lights on? Do you turn the lights off? And I like control when I'm on set, but at the same time, I like to save myself work. So you have to balance that. Here I ended up having to bring a ton of lights in, and it just was I think it took me 3 hours to set this all up, and I ended up changing my mind. This was another shoot that I had done. I used my tube light as a backlight. This was the smallest office I think I've worked in a long time to get all my equipment in. So it was tricky. This was kind of the final shot. Again, this was a plant manager. Probably could have brought a little bit more light into the background so it wasn't quite vignetting, but it was a tight space, so it was really tricky. He had a big natural light window there, which acted as a really nice balance here on the side. But you could tell that even the tube lights, I probably could have went a little lower. I probably would have lost it. It doesn't have that sharp edge on the shoulders as it would. So the tube lights do have their limitations. Cool, look at that. We're getting close, right on time. All right, so that's kind of everything. So to summarize, why should we choose lights? Well, because it creates shape, it hides distractions, it defines the mood, and it drives your story forward. Location scouting is one of the most overlooked pieces of that. So go on location. You're all in the cities. You have keys to the kingdom. Ask them if they can move something for your set. Be intentional about your backgrounds. 1 and 2 person interviews. Light your interviews separately for multi-people. For single person, try to stick with your traditional 3-point lighting unless you have a reason to not to. And then gear. Sun is free. Get what you can afford. You get what you pay for when it comes to lights. Cameras, use whatever. I think the phones are so good. I see guys all the time making films with phones, but they're still investing in lights and stuff like that. And then as far as your advanced techniques is create a mood based on your story, but also be intentional with that. Make sure you develop a scene in your backgrounds that kind of help advance the theme forward. So that's it. Anybody have any questions, any scenarios they wanted to kind of talk through, any situations? The beauty of lighting is that it is incredibly subjective to whatever your situation is. So I can give you these boilerplates, but ultimately you got to use the best of what you can in the situation. I don't think there's a wrong answer, especially when you're working by yourself. You can do whatever you want. Just be intentional.
Do we have time for your short doc?
Yeah, I can pull it up.
While he's doing that, I just want to remind everyone that there should be a little card on your table that has QR codes. There's one for workshop evaluations and one for our overall conference. And there's strategically placed on the doors and in the other room when we have our meals. So you can, use your phone, take a picture, and fill those out. It's just a Google Doc for us. So I'll let you continue.
Sure.
Thank you.
I switched computers. Thank you. I don't know where VLC is. There's VLC. I see it. If it'll let me. Oh, that's an image. That's why. Yeah, actually, so I've won 4 film festivals with this doc here. Oh, you can't read anything what I'm doing anyway. Do they have sound in the last one? Do you know? I don't have any sound.
Yeah, but sound workshop.
They better have. That's funny. Oh, do you have a separate green one? Oh, cool. Gotcha. 1/8 inch. Cool. So this was, so I'll just kind of set the stage with this. Not that I like doing that, but I was working with the fire department at a time on a bigger project. We actually did a documentary about the cadets flying out to New York, going to 9/11 Memorial. So that's kind of how that started, that relationship. And then they had come to me with this story of Jim who had died, and they wanted to engage people on hands-only CPR. This is kind of what came out of it. Hopefully it doesn't blow our ears off. Yeah.
I hear you came in for a oil change, and all of a sudden you started
Oh,
breathing real
hey,
heavy.
hear something, right?
He's
You
got
hear
his-
something?
You okay, bud?
911, what is the location of your emergency?
Super Loop Beaver Dam. I got a guy in here. He came in for an oil change, and all of a sudden he started breathing real heavy. He's got his eyes open. He's not responding to me. I yelled at him, and he just like breathed in and out real hard, and he's not responsive.
Just so you're aware, as we're talking, my partner is currently paging for the ambulance. I'm
Okay.
going to ask you a couple more questions.
No, it's he's got like a blank stare. His eyes are kind of rolling back. Do not breathe in.
The COVID scare was in full effect at that point. So the fire department was trying to look for different ways to engage with the community and get people out and cheer people up. So we had talked about doing birthday drive-bys. So we were going to take the ambulance and the engine out and just drive by a birthday party, bring some joy to somebody during the daytime when COVID was really hitting people hard. We pulled out of the station with the engine and the ambulance and went and parked at Wayland. And we started hearing a call come over the radio.
I said, "Hey man, are you okay?" And he didn't say nothing to me, and I went up to him again, and I shook him a couple times, and I could see that he was kind of turning like almost like bluish purple color, and he wasn't breathing. And
No, he just started breathing. He just gasped for air again.
He gasped for air again?
Yeah.
Okay. What I'd like you to do is, if you're strong enough to, I'd like you to take him out of his truck and get him flat on the ground.
All right, hold on a second. Mark, got his phone for me here.
It is very sporadic and gaspy. It is the best thing to do.
All right.
Are either of you comfortable starting?
Hey, start CPR, do chest compression.
Okay.
He's doing that right now.
Okay, and he knows how? Does he need
Yep.
to walk him through it?
No,
all?
he's got it.
And it's absolutely vital to make sure you get that CPR started immediately. And other tissues in the body and prevent them from dying.
I started doing CPR on him, and I remember him just telling me to keep on doing it, and he didn't do anything at first, and then all of a sudden he took a big gasp of air. He's like,
As we pulled in, they were waving us in to the actual oil change bay. And when we got in there, they were already doing CPR on Jim. I mean, that just made you feel like, all right, we got a chance here. 1, they're doing CPR already. 2, we just got here really fast. And 3, we have a lot of hands available. It was one of those where you looked at Jim and he looked dead. Ashen gray, eyes open, no color, and just that stare off into space. He was laying supine on the ground. It was still running through our mind, though. This just happened. This is our chance to get him back. We ended up defibrillating Jim 3 different times, and on the 3rd one, we got a sustainable pulse. We managed his airway, and we're ventilating for him, and gave some medications to help calm his heart muscles down, as well as kind of keep him going at the time.
2 days later, I woke up, and they told me what happened, and believe it or not, a day after that, I didn't walk out, but they wheeled me out of the hospital, and I went home. I mean, I think it's less than 4% of people survive from cardiac arrest, and that includes people who are in a controlled environment, like in the hospital already.
in cardiac arrest, time is survival. If you can get hands-only CPR started within the first 2 minutes, that's going to give that individual the best chance to survive. Once you get past that 2 to 4 minute range, 4 to 6 minutes, you're talking brain damage for sure, and then you're going to be working 6 to 10 minutes towards brain death.
Without everybody that was involved, I mean, I've had 2 more birthdays, 2 more vacations, 2 more of my daughter's birthdays, my wife's birthdays, anniversaries. I've had 2 more years, and luckily, I've got a decent prognosis now where I could live a full life.
What a blessing that is, and what a gift. And it doesn't take much. You know, it's a day at the fire station, no matter where you're located. Most all fire departments do it. And you know, it's a class for a day that will teach you literally how to save somebody's life.
His daughters made me a hand card that thanked me for saving her dad. And I got to talk to Jim afterwards. It's a pretty good feeling. You know, to know that he had a wife and 2 kids, and that he's gonna be there for him tomorrow, yeah, that's a pretty good feeling.
My name is Jim Schroffnagel, and on April 20th of 2020, I lived because of hands-only CPR.
Thank you to the Beaver Dam Fire Department and everyone else involved for help saving my dad's life.
Please reach out to the Beaver Dam Fire Department today for your hands-on CPR training.
Heavy stuff, right? Heavy stuff. So that was the actual 911 call. I think this is a good example of, I could have done a talking head PSA, right? I could have come down to the fire department on Saturday, we're doing a free hands-only CPR class, and you would have had, 2 people show up, if anybody, right? Or we could do something like this, and as of right now on YouTube, I think there's 120,000 views on this video. So think of the exposure that you could get for your community, or the exposure you could get for a cause that they're trying to push by putting some creative thought behind it and being intentional with your lighting, being intentional with your editing, creating a mood and a theme, and developing a story around a topic. So I think it's important for PEG stations to start moving in this direction. Just my opinion. If you want to start building that community and bringing the youth and getting people involved and trying developing that, I think this is the way to do it. So that's mine. I'm Jesse Wilson. Thank you guys.